All right. Well, obviously we've been talking about Megiddo, and this is a very strategic location. As she was saying, so many battles have been fought here for centuries. And in fact, what I read about the diggings and the archaeology, which she probably knows more than that now, but they found so far about 27 layers of different civilizations that took over this area. And it was the most sought after area because it had strategic location, it had access to roads, it had water, it had agricultural lands, and so all the countries wanted this prized possession, this area, and they were fighting over it for forever. When Joshua came, the Canaanites had it, of course. The Assyrians had it at some point. This is where Josiah was killed in Megiddo, and actually Napoleon said about this place that the immensity of the plain is so astonishing that when he saw it, he said, all the armies of the world could maneuver their forces on this vast plain. There is no place in the whole world more suited for war than this. It is the most natural battleground of the whole earth. And of course, it has been that, or it was that for a long time. So what I want to look at today, just for a few minutes, is in Judges 4, is when Deborah was here. And of course, one of my particular interests is women in the Bible. And Deborah is one of those heroines of the Old Testament. And I wanted to look at what happened with her in Judges chapter 4. It says, the Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud had died. So the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his forces was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth of the nations. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord, because Jabin had 900 iron chariots, and he harshly oppressed them 20 years. Deborah, a woman who was a prophet and the wife of Lapidot, was judging Israel at that time. It was her custom to sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went up to her for judgment. She summoned Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kedesh in Naphtali, and said to him, hasn't the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go, deploy the troops on Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men from the Naphtalites and the Zebulunites, and then I will lure Sisera, commander of Jabin's forces, his chariots, and his army, at the Wadi Kishon to fight against you, and I will hand him over to you. Barak said to her, if you will go with me, I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go. I will go with you, she said, but you will receive no honor on the road you are about to take, because the Lord will sell Sisera into a woman's hand. So Deborah got up and went with Barak to Kadesh, and Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. 10,000 men followed him, and Deborah also went with him. Now Heber, the Kenite, had moved away from the Kenites, the sons of Hobab, Moses' father-in-law, and pitched his tent beside the oak tree of Zananim, which was near Kadesh. It was reported to Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up Mount Tabor, and Sisera summoned all his 900 chariots and all the people who were with him from Harosheth of the nations to the Wadi Kishon. Then Deborah said to Barak, move on, for this is the day the Lord has handed Sisera over to you. Hasn't the Lord gone before you? So Barak came down from Mount Tabor, which we can see in the distance, with 10,000 men following him. The Lord threw Sisera, all his charioteers, and all his army into confusion with the sword before Barak. Sisera left his chariot and fled on foot. Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth of the nations, and the whole army of Sisera fell by the sword. Not a single man was left. Meanwhile, Sisera had fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber, the Kenite, because there was peace between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. Jael went out to greet Sisera and said to him, come in, my lord, come in with me, don't be afraid. So he went into her tent, and she covered him with a rug. He said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. She opened a container of milk, gave him a drink and covered him. Then he said to her, "Stand at the entrance to the tent. If a man comes and asks you, 'Is there a man here?' say no." While he was sleeping from exhaustion, Heber's wife, Jael, took a tent peg, grabbed a hammer, and went silently to Sisera. She hammered the peg into his temple and drove it into the ground, and he died. When Barak arrived in pursuit, and Sisera, Jael went out to greet him and said to him, "Come, and I will show you the man you're looking for." So he went in with her, and there was Sisera lying dead with a tent peg through his temple. And that day God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites. The power of the Israelites continued to increase against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they destroyed him. And then the next chapter is Deborah's song, which when you get a chance you can read that, and it tells a little bit more about what happened to the chariots when the Kishon River overflowed and they were bogged down in the mud. But this story, to me, really illustrates the part that women are also supposed to play in God's plan in the world. And, you know, the Hebrew Bible's view of women's nature and her relationship with men's is very different from the world's. Eve was created to be a blessing and a helpmeet opposite to Adam. That word helpmeet is ezer kenegdo, and it means helpmeet opposite. It means that she is not defined solely in terms of her relationship to Adam. She is a personality with her own role and in the divine plan. And it is this independence that enables her to find freedom within her relationship with Adam, not in withdrawing from the relationship or destroying it. So the term helpmeet, and a lot of times has lost its meaning as we translated it into English, about what God really intended for women. It literally and simply means helpmeet opposite. And that means that at her best, the woman will be kind and supportive, but also wise and independent, so as to set the man straight when he needs it. She is his helper. There are two parts. The woman in a relationship with the man is supportive. She's the helper, the ezer. But when he is wrong, her support takes the form of opposing him. Amen. And so the effective kenegdo, I'm probably not saying this right, Catherine can help me with this, is a high form of kindness. And that's how God created women to be. Two very ancient Aramaic translations of this interpret it as corresponding support, which implies that a successful support must be a full partner, one whose strength and independence are comparable to and complement her mates. So the woman, like the man, is created in the image of God, and only thus can they carry on a healthy relationship in which they both grow. And that's seen with Deborah. There are times when the woman best fulfills her mission by agreeing with the man in her life, and other times by opposing him. But both approaches can be positive and supportive. And she does this as his friend and not his enemy. So I think we see this played out with Deborah and Barak. In this story, Deborah is a prophetess and she's a judge. It says she sits at the gate and she pronounces judgments. There's some debate as to whether she was really judging or just giving prophecies and telling the people what God was planning for his people, but she was clearly speaking for God at this point. And we have a few prophetesses. We have Miriam, we have Deborah, we have Philip's daughters, we have Huldah, and sometimes God uses the woman to be the voice for him. And at this point in time, during these days, it was Deborah. So they've been wickedly treated for 20 years, and they would have been taking over their crops, their land. They would have been abusing them in so many ways, and Jabin oppressed them, and was in this great place where you have battles, was coming in to fight them. And God had spoken to Deborah, of course, and saying, "Okay, it's time. I'm going to give them into your hands. It's all going to be, you're going to win the battle." She tells this prophecy to Barak, and Barak is not so keen. She's speaking for God, and he understands that. I think he has a great respect for her, but he decides, "I will not go without you. you're the spokeswoman for God, and God is with you and is speaking words through you, and he would not go without her. And she would not go without him. She was a judge, but she was one of a few judges who was not also a military leader. She didn't take on that role. She left that to Barak. That was his specialty. So they were going to do this together. She was going to be that helpmeet to him, and but at the same time, she said, but if the glory, of course, will go to a woman. It will end up that way. He didn't mind that as long as she came along. He knew we're going to win if you're there. The Bible calls her the wife of Lapidoth, which could also just as well mean fiery woman.
Wow.
So Deborah keeps the moral spirit and teachings alive among the people during this difficult time. She's been this source of strength and encouragement to them. And I think Barak could see that as well. So they go on, of course, as the story goes on. The Lord confused and routed Sisera and all the chariots and all of the panic that ensued and fought them. And then Sisera, being such a brave soul, fled on foot to his ally, his friend, what was his name? I forgot. Jael's husband, Kenai. Anyway, they had this alliance. They were friends, and so he decides, I'll run to his place. We're not quite sure. Why did he end up at her tent? Probably this guy had more than one wife, and Heber the Kenite, that was her husband's name. A lot of times they have more than one wife. Each wife has their own tent. That's kind of how it works. But you were not supposed to have men into your tent as a woman anyway. So there are quite a few violations that she had during this time of hospitality. First of all, she usurps her husband's exclusive right as a male to offer hospitality to a male. That was only for a man to do. Of course, in killing Sisera, she violates the covenant between Heber and Sisera's superior, the comradeship they had. In killing Sisera, who had sought hospitality and protection in her house, she violates the fundamental rights of guests. So she went against quite a few of the Middle Eastern traditions in this, and in nailing him to the floor. It wasn't really Near Eastern hospitality, but he comes in and wants a drink of, and not typical, I should say. He comes in and, of course, wants a drink of water. Well, she doesn't give him water. She gives him milk, because milk makes you sleepy. And he's probably warm from running for his life. He's heated up. She gives him milk and then covers him to make sure he gets even warmer, to make sure he's gone to sleep. And then, of course, she very stealthily grabs a tent peg and must have very quietly gone over and planted it on him. And she didn't do anything really noisy because she didn't want to wake him up. She didn't grab anything that was going to be make too much noise. She was doing it in a very quiet way. But in this, we see the differences between two basic types of women who are living in this area at that time. The first type is represented by Deborah and Jael, but then we have another woman who shows up later in Deborah's song, and that is Sisera's mother. And if you know Judges 5, they sing a song, and his mother is waiting for him to come back from this war and bring the spoils of war to her. And she's wondering why he's taking so long. And she's looking out her window, and she's calling out for him and wondering, is he going to bring her jewels, and is he having fun with the local women, and what is he doing? So we have Deborah and Jael, who are peace-loving women, but when faced with a crisis, they rise to the occasion. Jael would definitely have chutzpah and took care of things, but not from bloodlust and not for revenge. It was from this oppression and this inhumanity that they were. It wasn't for a desire for power, but to defend their people and to fulfill God's purpose. And because you never get the idea that Deborah or Jael were seeking power in what they were doing. And even Barak, he's not seeking power either. They're all just trying to protect their people and fight against their enemies. So Deborah came to the battle with them, and she warns him that the people will give this victory to the woman. And of course, that woman ends up being Jael. And Sisera's mother is this woman who has no empathy for other women. She's just looking for the looting and the spoils and the conquest and the power. And her love for her son is mostly preoccupied with that. And then, of course, the next woman we come across, which Mike mentioned earlier, is Jezebel in this area, in this part of the world. And like Mike said, she was married to Ahab. Her father was a priest of Baal, and so that's why she probably got the name Jezebel. And she was a priestess, and so she set about to change the religion of the country. Ahab obviously had very low convictions. He was not strong in his religion, and so she was going to get this country to embrace the Canaanite Phoenician religion. And the pagan gods were, as Mike mentioned earlier, they were Baal and Asherah, and Baal was the god of thunder and war and lightning, and thus Elijah makes it not rain. And as in everything in the Bible is a book about God. It's not a book about people, really. It's not a book about history. It's a book about God. And so that's why there's not always a lot of detail in things about the people, or we want to know more, because it's never about them. The players change all through. Yeah. There are different people all through, but that's not the point.
Yeah,
the point is it's about God.
Right.
And this what's going on with Jezebel, it's a battle over who will we worship here. And will God win? And of course, as Mike was talking about Elijah and the prophets of Baal and all of that, it was God's battle. And these people are just players in it, as we all are in this world with the battle that God has going on. So anyway, Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets in Judges 18. And this was a religious move, but also a political move. Because in the pagan religion that she worshipped, these prophets that she had served her. They served the king. The king, from her background, her Phoenician background, the king was all powerful, and these prophets served her. Unlike the prophets of Yahweh, where they served God, they didn't serve the king. In fact, often they were opposed to the king. Mm-hmm. Now, this was a total mind change for Jezebel. That's not what she was used to. That's not what a king was like. A king was all powerful, and everybody else served him, including the religious prophets and God's prophets. And so when Ahab, in her opinion, was weak about taking Naboth's vineyard, if you remember that story, and you can read about that in First Kings, she takes over. She takes charge. And Ahab lets her. Ahab doesn't mention the religious scruple that's well established in Hebrew law about selling inherited land, because probably he's ashamed to seem weak in front of his Phoenician queen. You know, this is not what a king acts like. And there's a great connection always, as you've probably figured out, and Catherine's been telling us, between God's people and his land, their land. There's always a great affinity and connection, and you are a part of the land. You pass it on to your ancestors, and it is a part of who you are. And it's very much from the beginning where Adam was taken from the dust of the earth, and we're connected to the land. And so Ahab knew he was doing the wrong thing, but I probably rather liked Jezebel's idea of a king and wanted to be a part of that. But as of course we know, the story goes on, and Elijah runs from Jezebel. You know, he wins the day for God and the prophets of Baal, but then he runs from her. But later on, his successor, Elisha, and Jehu, and continue to fight on. And Jezebel is brought down. She's actually pushed from a window by one of her own people and trampled on the ground and then eaten by dogs, which was God's prophecy about her, which was given so long ago that Elisha had prophesied about. And Jehu went in, had his dinner, had a meal, and then as an afterthought thought, oh, well, maybe we should go gather up what's left of Jezebel. And all that was left of her were her hands and her hands and something else. I think, and anyway, so they decided, okay, well, we'll bury those parts of her, and that was the end of Jezebel. So obviously, Jezebel was not your helpmeet opposite.